Hi, welcome back. We're looking at three gifts, a clock, a key, and a net, given to the bride of Christ at her midnight hour in age-to-age timekeeping, which is happening now. Today we're going to look at the story of Eutychus in Acts 20. It's another one of those 12 scriptural references that occurs at midnight. So let's set the scene. It's the first day of the week. Paul and his traveling companions, who were also spiritual leaders in the early church, met together in an upper room to break bread. Now, Paul is holding a discussion, and since he intended to leave the next day, Paul continued speaking with them until midnight. Okay, Paul is short on time, and the clock is pressuring him. He only has a few hours to be with this group of leaders, and so we can assume that there's a time crunch going on in Paul's mind. Scripture also tells us that there are many lamps in the room, in the upper room where they were meeting. And so, okay, it's midnight, there's no shortage of oil, but I'd like to talk about the two types of illumination that are at play in this scenario. There's temporal oil and there's eternal oil. Look at the key of seven thunders. This wheel of light provides us with a common spiritual language. Now, the lamps in this upper room would have burned a source of oil that can be extracted from animal fat, vegetation, or the earth. Either way, the oil provides a temporal source of light at midnight. On the other hand, Paul and his spiritual companions would have been talking about an eternal source of illumination, oil that can only be derived from the one Jesus called Abba. God's eternal oil burns within the human heart as the likeness of God created within humanity. It is a source of illumination that never runs out, and God's divine fire complements the greater light of day while also empowering us with the gift of dominion or self-governance and the gift of spiritual freedom. So here we are living at the midnight hour in the life of the bride of Christ, and we need to ask, who or what is our source of illumination? Is God's eternal oil burning in our hearts, or are we burning the midnight oil from a temporal source? Are we empowered with the gifts of self-governance and spiritual freedom? Does our illumination reflect a greater light of day, even in the dark of night? Now the story continues. A young man named Eutychus, who was sitting in the window of the well-lit upper room, began to sink off into a deep sleep, while Paul talked still longer. Okay, we are well into the midnight hour here, and Paul is still talking, but no one is noticing that Eutychus is falling asleep, and this is a problem. Overcome by sleep, Eutychus falls to the ground 3 floors down and is picked up dead. Now notice that Eutychus does not fall toward the temporal light in the upper room. He falls 3 stories down away from the temporal light into the darkness of midnight. And those who pick him up believe he is dead. Now this could be interpreted as an absolute tragedy, but it isn't. It's actually marking a new beginning. Paul leaves the upper room and he descends to the street level. He falls on the boy and he embraces him in his arms and says, "Do not be alarmed, for life is in him." Now, none of us witnessed this event, but let's assume that new life entered the boy in the darkness of the midnight hour. And let's consider the present spiritual condition of the bride of Christ at her midnight hour, which is happening now. Can we hear spiritual leaders talking on and on and on about the death of Jesus while listeners are falling asleep, despite being inside well-lit rooms within the institutional model of the church? Have we seen, or do we know of listeners who have been tumbling out of windows away from the light provided within the institution for quite some time now? And those who have tumbled away, do we assume that they are dead on the street? Are they dead? Or are they alive with new life? Which is it? Will everyone who tumbles away from the institutional church survive the fall from a higher place to a lower place? This is important because the new life given to the bride of Christ at midnight is born at the grassroots level of human existence. The people who will eventually lay the foundation of her new organizational model, a net of 144, will not be gathering in upper rooms. The way of Jesus spreads out as a net over the spiritual waters of her community without being attached at ground level to a physical building, just as Jesus lived without a roof over his head. Now, the account of Eutychus ends in this way. After proclaiming that Eutychus had life in him, Paul leaves the street level and returns to the upper room. After he had broken bread and eaten, he continued to converse with the other spiritual leaders until dawn. And that's when he left. But dawn is also a time clue. Meanwhile, other unspecified people had taken the boy away alive, and they were not a little comforted. In other words, everyone was immensely relieved that no one died that night. Now, the concerning aspect of this account is that the young man's sleepiness and his tumble from the window did not change anything that Paul and his spiritual companions were doing. It was an incident that diverted Paul's attention for a few moments, but the micro timekeeping clock ticked on, and nothing changed. Will this be the future of the bride of Christ after her midnight hour turning point in age to age time? Will she continue to function in well-lit upper rooms, breaking bread and talking on and on about Jesus until the dawn of a 9th day of creation? Will she miss an opportunity to gain additional oil for her lamps? Will she fail to notice new life in the hearts and minds of those who tumbled away from the light of her former life? Will she fail to embrace new life at the street level of human existence? Well, only time will tell. Next up, dropping anchors in a storm.